Boom, there we go. One of the first things, the reason I do this is with this current lockdown, which people here from all over the world and all over America, every place is kind of opening at different rates and all that. And, it's a political discussion, what's right, what's wrong. But we're starting to see the repercussions of the long-term effects of what's happened. And it's been, depending where you're at, it's been, somewhere between, 8 to 16 weeks on this lockdown, depending on where you are and what was going on. And, we're seeing it. There's been a mass increase in suicides, right? There's been a mass, on the upside, if you own stocks in any of the liquor or beer companies, they're doing quite well. Because, of course, here in America and Canada, I'm not sure about the rest, and pretty much every place I checked that sold liquor, it was considered an essential service, right? And then people make their, well, you don't want people going into detox and this and that. It's like, I always say this when I hear that argument. Do you know where most people detox, ladies and gentlemen? County jail in the United States. They don't give a shit that you're throwing up and shaking in the corner. Some of us have been there or seen it, but all of a sudden, we're worried about it. The only political thing I'll say too, I've noticed in one of the first things to open down here in Florida and all over the country are golf courses, because heaven forbid you don't want rich white guys inconvenienced. Sorry, that was politically incorrect, but alcohol in states here in America and Canada where dope marijuana was legal, those sales are through the roof, right? And it's because people are self-medicating and that. So, it's neither right nor wrong. It's just the way that it is. And so let's just get started and have some fun. By the way, here's a personal note. Looks like Universal is going to open in the first part of June for a limited thing for, like, my wife said, one of those Universal Pass members to come in with no kids. I'm excited. I can go play on Harry Potter without little Rugrats, raise my kids. I don't want to be around anybody else's. Sorry. Anyway, no, not sorry. All right, let me get started and have some fun with this. Let me start my PowerPoint, because I'm a PowerPoint kind of guy. Where is it at? There it is. Boom. Okay, as some of you know, I wrote this book, Alcohol and Addiction Solution. Kind of what we're talking. I've been in the process of rewriting it for over a year, or updating it. So it won't be an update. It'll be a slightly different book. And you'll hear my thought processes behind this and why I did what I did, right? But I always stress this. The truth is, addiction kills a lot more than just the addict or the alcoholic, right? I mean, it kills everything. It kills love. It kills respect. It kills ambition. It kills relationships. It can kill all kinds of things, not just for the addict, but the people around them. There's that whole syndrome of adult children of alcoholics, that don't feel worthy, that never accomplish enough, to end up in more dysfunctional relationships. People that are attracted to narcissists. There was some loose research that tracked back those types of people are much more prone to come from alcoholic or drug addicted families, and so it kills much, much more than just the addict or the alcoholic. And to me, that's some of the things that we forget. But as we get started, I always ask this, as we get started in this little 1 hour or so, because I'm respectful of your time, even in a lockdown, how can I enjoy the training today? I want you to ask yourself 3 questions. How can I enjoy this training, this educational experience today? What new information can I learn and apply about addictions? And a lot of this is generalized information you can apply in different places. So what new information can I learn and apply? And a caveat of that, question 2A, what new information can I learn about myself? Since we're learning some of this, does some of this bring up negative feelings or like, ooh, whatever, or just what do I learn about myself? And my big question, people that know me, how can I have more fun than I thought possible in this class today? Right? Because if you're having fun, you learn more, right? My contact info, if anybody doesn't have it, is the main website's NFNLP. There's a couple other websites. AA Solve, which stands for alladdictionsolve.com. I'm on Twitter as Dr. Will at Real NLP. I'm on Instagram. I always forget my Facebook thing, but I'm on Facebook. So feel free to get in touch with me in any way you can. My truth. I don't help people kick addictions and get better to make money. I make money so I can help people kick addictions and get better. That's my new mantra for a lot of things, right? And it flips how I think about it. So that's why I do what I do. And it's part of my story because these kind of learning NLP and hypnosis or having it exposed to me didn't just save my life. It gave me a life worth living. And that's why I'm so passionate about, especially this little aspect. And it transferred to so many other things, not just alcohol, drugs, gambling, sex, porn, those kind of, now social media addiction, all those kind of addictions. It transfers to food, relationships, a lot of the dynamics, the psychological dynamics run through a lot of things. What would happen if you could help others recover from an addiction that kills more people than everything else? The only other, I say this, but I'll always say one of the only political statements, I'll probably make a lot of them, but more people will die from addictions than the current virus thing going around. Flat out, I mean, if you want to consider smoking an addiction in the United States alone, between 450 and 600,000 people die from smoking, and of course, if you smoke, it makes you much more susceptible to all flu viruses, in fact, all viruses. So what happens if you could help people with this addiction? Well, one of the things I got to say is when you think about this, right? Addictions make you do stupid stuff, right? I've heard around my whole addiction career, my personal story too, is every time I drank, I didn't get in trouble, but every time I got in trouble, I was drinking, major trouble. It didn't happen every time, but pretty much all the time, right? And addiction is, it starts innocently and it ends up killing you. A lot of times, one way to think of an addiction is the answer to your problem becomes the problem, if that makes sense, right? Because you have a few drinks after work to relax, right? You smoke a joint to unwind, fine. So that's your answer to a problem. But then their answer becomes the problem: the drinking, the drugging, whatever it happens to be. It's no secret, real quick. Alcohol and drug abuse, #1 cause of divorce underneath the stuff, because it also, substance abuse is also the underlying cause of a lot of financial problems. So it's usually that, and also like infidelities, that maybe a person that wouldn't normally, cheat gets drunk and does stupid shit. That's the only way to describe it. One thing I'll tell everybody, my language gets a little more colorful as this kind of training goes on, because I kick into how do you talk to alcoholics and drug addicts. Substance abuse, #1 cause of prison population. I was the clinical director of a psychological unit at a Florida state prison. I worked at Cook County Jail and all that. And I can minimum 50% of the population is there because of alcohol and drugs. They did something under the influence or to get high or whatever it was. Between that and mental illness, that's about 75% of our prison population, because in the United States, for those of you not from here, prison and jails have become the de facto mental health treatment facilities in America. They lock you up, right? Substance abuse costs about $750 billion a year. That's about 5-year-old numbers now. In lost business income alone, you miss work, things happen like that. It's the #1 cause of the homeless population, majority of auto deaths. But we always have to remember, most addicts and alcoholics are highly functional. It's one of the big defense mechanisms. I'm not an alcoholic or an addict. I still have, a house and 2 cars and, money and boats and toys. But most are highly functional. In fact, they may overcompensate. And almost every family is touched by the problem. If not in the immediate family, at least if you go out a little bit and it says almost, I'd say every family's touched by this problem. And again, here's a cool one I always tell people: 80% of the alcohol is consumed by 10% of the people who drink. Okay? At any given time, a whole bunch of the population doesn't drink. Maybe they're health issues, religion, whatever, they don't drink. you know, so it's about a third of the population doesn't drink for whatever, you know, maybe they're on meds, whatever. But the people that do drink, most of the alcohol's drank by a small percentage of the population that drink. So if you think about that, and that seems to run true to other addictions, you know, other things like pain pills. You know, most of the pain pills are taken by a very small group of the people that take pain pills. I live in Florida. They still prescribe pain medication, right? Opioids. You have a hip replacement, a knee replacement, you know, all this stuff, bad, you know, you break your back, they still give it. Most people take less than what's prescribed. Everybody forgets that, right? Alcohol withdrawal kills more people than all the other drugs combined. You know, I think it's like 1 out of 10 people that die in county jail die from alcohol withdrawal. You know, a lot of times by the time that happens, they don't have family, they don't have a good social network, so they just pass away. And then here's a big one. There's a social stigma about not drinking in our culture, especially here in America. If you don't drink, people sometimes look at you funny. If you're at a conference, somebody, would you like a drink? No, that's fine. Are you sure? Right? Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Well, we have beer. They'll go through the whole litany, and if you keep saying no, they're finally. It's almost like there's something wrong with you because you don't want to have a drink. You know, it's just kind of funny. Even in our world of hypnosis and NLP, this is kind of true. There's one conference I go to where it's in Vegas, so there's a lot of partying going on, and you'll be at one of the things, and they go, "You want a drink?" No, that's okay. I'm buying. No, I don't want. You sure? No, I'm cool. You know. Anyway, it's just kind of funny, but because there's a social stigma about it, and lately it's kind of creeping into places with smoking dope, in the places where it's legal. Now let's try. What's the difference between a habit and an addiction? Well, Dr. Wendy Wood, she's from the University of California, Berkeley, I think. So anyway, it's either Berkeley or Santa Barbara. But anyway, she says about a minimum of 45% of your life is habit. You live by habit. You don't think about it, right? Somebody asked alcohol addiction different from smoking. We'll get to that because I'll talk a lot about alcohol because it's one of the most prevalent, but it's the same mechanisms when we get to it. But Wendy Woods talks about, Dr. Woods talks about most of your life is based on habits that you develop, right? They're pre-conscious. You don't have to think about them. The upside to developing a habit is it frees up your brain. You don't have to think about it. You get in your car, you turn the key, you go, right? So you don't have to think. It frees your brain up to do other things. The downside is once it's in there, it's hard to break. I tell the story. I bought this truck, and in fact, our 2 trucks, the gear shift is one of these things on the thing. You know, you click it this way, right? Well, when I first got in the car, when I first bought my truck and I started driving it, I was used to I had a Porsche, so I had a thing on the floor. Oh, it drove me crazy, right? Then I got used to this. Then I went to a conference and I rented a car. I jump in the car and I couldn't get the thing in gear because and what I was doing was turning up the damn radio, right? And screaming at the car. Wait, my foot's on the brake. What's going on? The music's coming up and I'm like screaming. Well, I was twisting the knob. Then I go, oh yeah, there's the gear shift thing, and drop it into drive and drive because I had to pull out of that thought process, right? Dr. Graybill, she's a professor at MIT, says the brain seems to be hardwired to seek some near optimality, if you will, to optimize your brain. It's cost benefit. The less mental energy with the sugars and the fats I have to use in my brain, the more I have for later on. It's always about conserving energy. And thinking burns energy. If you ever had a tough day of just in your head, like computer people, that's why they're always nibbling on candy, it seems like. It's burning a lot of energy. It's a different kind, you know, but it's there. So your brain seems to be hardwired for this. And this ties into addiction, right? And so they did a study, and what the study was, a typical study, torture rats, it's what psychologists do, is they put the rat in a maze, you know, and then there was a wall, and the wall would go up as they heard it, or they'd hear a click like that, and then the wall would go up, and then the rat could go. It was a simple T maze, so it looked like this, and it would go down and turn and find the chocolate. And so when they'd first do the click, and then the wall would go up, the rat would scratch and sniff, scratch and sniff. And what they found was it didn't take long. The rat learned, because it was a simple maze, that when it heard the click, its brain would activate and it would start thinking. The wall would go up and pretty soon it would just run down, take a right, get the chocolate, right? Because what happened the first few rounds, this is mental activity. There was a lot of mental activity. Your brain was working. It was burning energy. And again, your brain wants to optimize. And so after it learned it, they hear the click, it would think like, oh, got to get ready. And then it would, once the wall went up, it's almost like their brain went to sleep. They just trucked down, hung a right, I think it was, and got the chocolate. And then once it got to the chocolate, started thinking about it, like, look, then it would go back into thinking. It's like if you've ever taken a certain path, like if you drove to an office every day or school or wherever you go, grocery store, if you always take the same path, you just get on it and go. If you ever started to leave your house, I remember this used to happen, and it's about the time I usually go to the office, but I wasn't going to the office that day. I turned the same way, and I'd end up almost at the office before I realized it, right? It's happening now because I start going to go work out, and I always turn where we take care of the horse. Even though I don't have to take care of the horse today, or my wife's done it, it's like, and I end up on that road because I'm not thinking. I'm just I'm thinking. My brain's down here, but it's doing other things. And these habits, if you will, they live deep in your brain, right? The basal ganglia, the deep areas of your brain, deep down there. And that's why once they're in there, they're in there. So which is it? Is it a habit or is it an addiction? Well, a habit is a good servant, but it's a horrible master. Once you get a habit, it's hard. It kind of gets in there. It's one of the things we've seen with the lockdown is our habits were thrown out of what we're used to. If you got up every day and you went to the health club before you went to the office, well, now the office is closed and the health club. So a lot of it is just, it's pattern interrupt, right? And those of us study hypnosis and NLP, and you learn about pattern interrupts. A pattern interrupt is interrupting a habit that the person has in their head. That's how it works. So their brain's like this, and suddenly something's different. They have to pull out of that program, we'd call it, and then it's easier to do things. A habit becomes a behavior, or a behavior becomes a habit, when it no longer requires a decision. So if you're like, think you're driving to work, there's no decision. Next thing, in my case, I'd go down, take a right, take a left, take a right, and go down that way, right? And it's best, if you want to realize it this way, habits eliminate the need for self-control. If you learn to buckle your seatbelt when you first get in the car, it's probably second nature for you to buckle your seatbelt. The people that seem to have trouble buckling their seatbelts are those of us, especially, that there weren't seatbelts mandated in cars. They were still new. So you just really didn't do it, right? And so it becomes, there was no decision there, right? And if you want to change habits, it's easier to change habits by building on old habits, which we'll get to in the addiction. And I always talk really quickly about routine and ritual, and what people make mistakes about habits, and we'll get to how they separate or differentiate from addictions. You develop routines and rituals. And some people, one of those big myths out there is it only takes 21 days to make or break a habit. If you've heard that saying, it only takes 7 or 21 days to make or break a habit. It's one of those things that is just bullshit. My bird's screaming in the background. It's bullshit, right? Because if it only took 21 days to make or break a habit, my wife's gone, so the bird is going crazy. I don't know if you guys can hear it through the thing. It's driving me crazy. It's doing a pattern interrupt. But if it only took 21 days to make or break a habit, life wouldn't be as difficult as it is. And I always talk about either athletes or the military. And in the military, in the Navy, they have a saying, shiny shoes saves ships. The Army says shiny shoes saves lives, right? But it's all about discipline. If you show up and you see a friend of mine is a Navy captain, and he goes, when he's the executive officer or took over his first command, first thing he did when he got on the ship was check out, as he's walking through, he's checking out the uniforms of the sailors. because if it's wrinkled and things are kind of sloppy, he knows that crew is kind of sloppy. What are they going to do when there's a fire in the galley and then there's a live, there's combat? What are they going to do? So it's about discipline. But if you think about it, if it was that easy, I always think of this. If it was that easy, if you only had to do something like 21 days or, and then you do it regularly after that for a while, it will become a habit. You'll never have to think about it. If this is true, how come you see people like guys and girls, they go in the military, especially I'll pick on the Marines, let's say the Marines. And so for 4 to 6 years, depending on the enlistment, every day or almost every day, they're physically training unless they're on leave. But it's part of their routine. They work out in the morning. They do PT. Same in the Army for certain, certain jobs. And then even in the Army, all during basic training and a lot of your advanced training, you work out every morning, right? And in the Marines, they work out every day, even when they're doing their other jobs, right? So they do this for like 4 to 6 years, and then they get out of the Marines. So that means many more than 21 days, they've done the physical exercise, running, doing push-ups, all that physical training for years. So literally thousands of times. And then they get out of the Marines, they never do it again, right? The Navy and the Army has that problem with the guys that work out a lot in basics because they have to, and advanced training. And unless they're in a combat unit where it's part of it, they get to their duty station, they never exercise again. Even though for 6 or 7 months, it was part of their ritual. What happened, right? It was second nature when they were doing it, but they didn't internalize it into a deep kind of habit. It was something that they had to do rather than something that they become, right? And again, that's why you see these guys, girls get out of the Corps, and they just they don't look like they were in the Corps. It's, and I remember, I think it was Tony Robbins, my dear friend Tony Robbins, was he was doing a thing, giving a talk at a Marine Corps base, and he started that conversation with one of the generals, and the general said, I always wondered that these young guys and girls come in, they look good, their uniforms are squared away, they're strapped, they're in shape, they're great, Marines. They get out of the Marines, he runs into them 2 years later, they're overweight, they're sloppy, they're not disciplined. And he wondered, was it because people weren't disciplined? Were they naturally lazy? And it all has to do with the peers that they surround themselves with. When you're in those units, you work out like that, right? But then if you get to the unit where they don't work out, or you get to civilian life where a lot of people don't work out, there's that. So you can seem to have a habit, but it may not become internalized. A true habit becomes internalized. And addiction is one level above it, where it's a self-generating reward system. One of the problems people think is they try to figure out why people drink or do drugs, right? And it's kind of makes sense to me. I do this because you do that. It doesn't have to make sense. We all know human beings do not necessarily make sense. And I've seen people spend years trying to figure out why they were an alcoholic or a drug addict, doing insight therapy. They become very insightful, but they're still an alcoholic or a drunk, and they're not getting better. So somebody has a question. Shoot the question in the chat, Manwari, it'd be easier. So, so if you spend too much time trying to figure out why, rather than just fix the behavior, right? One of the things, if you fix the behavior, the why may take care of itself. Maybe it was the way you were raised. Maybe it was other things, but whatever it is, right? So, and that's why clinical therapy never really seemed to work for addictions, right? They get real insightful, but they're not changing the behavior. They'll go to their therapist once a week, talk about it, figure it out. My mom was codependent. My dad was an alcoholic. I'm a child of an alcoholic. I don't feel worthy. They get all this insight, but every day, the days they're not going, the day they don't go, the other 4 days a week, they stop every day after work to go to the bar. Now they have all this insight, and yet they're doing it. So you have to change at every level. Now, substance abuse, give you some clinical definitions so you have some knowledge in case you don't. It's when you use a substance even though it's causing maladaptive patterns of behavior, as they would say in psychology, right? In psychiatry. You're drinking or drugging, or if you want to talk about other addictions, uh, pornography or gambling, even when it's causing a problem, you keep doing it, right? The difference between a substance abuse and substance dependence is the length of time you're doing it, right? Because you may go through a period where you abuse substances and then it will kind of self-correct, right? And I'll give you my model on why that is in a moment. It'll self-correct, right? So you may be drinking or drugging or doing something a little bit too much right now, like because you're under stress. We're seeing it right now with the lockdown. Maybe people are drinking too much. They would fit the criteria for substance abuse. Their wife or their husband's yelling at them. They're still slamming down too many beers or glasses of wine, whatever it is, right? Now what'll happen once things open up and they can go back to normal behavior, will they continue to abuse that substance? That's the question, right? Because if not, then they become dependent on it, right? They give some markers like 3 times in a 12-month period, but I just say it's more ongoing. So when you get substance dependence, like right now, you say, I'm only drinking this much because, I can't work and I'm locked in my house. And now, let's say June 1st, everything opens, you go back to work and you're still drinking too much. Now that's crossed from substance abuse to substance dependence. And the other big thing with dependence is there's a physical withdrawal syndrome, right? And this is true even for things that don't have a physical, I don't want to say physical aspect, but like you'll withdraw from alcohol or drugs, but you'll also have a physical withdrawal syndrome from even things like gambling, pornography, all these other things. You'll have those, right? So you'll have, and the difference is it's not just to use drinking. It's not just you're hungover, or if you're using cocaine, it's not just you got to crash for a day because you were using a little bit too much and you're exhausted and you go to bed. It is you think you're going to die. You physically think you're going to die, right? And so that's the difference. Everybody, even if you're a social drinker, you drink too much, you might get a hangover, and that has to do with the toxins in your body, right? And again, it's the continued use, even when there's a persistent physical or social problem because of it. If you drink again, you're going to get fired. If you get high again, your wife, your girlfriend, your husband, whoever it is going to leave you. Then you're dependent on that, right? Here's what people try to do to get better. First, they try to white knuckle it, right? They try to white knuckle it. And that's just self-willpower. I just won't drink today. Maybe they go to a 12-step meeting like Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous or Overeaters. And there's an anonymous thing for everybody. Maybe there's Hypnosis Anonymous if you're addicted to hypnosis, right? But you go to a 12-step program, right? They go to therapy. They try switching drugs. I won't drink whiskey. I'll only drink beer. I'll only drink natural wines. I'll only do whatever it is, right? And it kind of boils down to a lot of people are trying to think their way out of an addiction, a physical addiction, right? And really, it's just not going to work, oops, excuse me. It's like my little cat there. I'm going to do this today. I'm going to do this today. He's going to catch the red dot. No, it's just, you've crossed over. If you wake up today and you go, I'm not going to have a drink. I'm not going to smoke a joint. I'm not going to watch porn. I'm not going to gamble. And then you end up doing it, right? Because you haven't changed at the deeper level. Really quickly, and this is, I talk a lot about alcohol because it's the most tracked, by the way. Here's how and it was the first like treatment modality, if you will. In this country, when you look at like alcohol and is it a problem, The first doctor to talk about it was Dr. Benjamin Rush. He was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, right? And it was about 1785, a little bit after the signing of the Declaration. And he said the drug alcohol, and he called it a drug, some people could not handle it, right? They have to have total abstinence, right? That's all he said. And there was no recovery plan. It was just don't drink, right? And then what happened? There was the temperance movement, right? And this was right around 1800, early like 1800, 1810, where you need to temperate your drinking, temper it. Don't go too much, right? They didn't give you a plan, but they knew if you drank too much, bad things happened, right? But here's one of the keys. It was around 1826, 1824 to 1830. A fundamentalist preacher, Pentecostal preacher named Lyman Beecher, started preaching on sin and weakness, that drinking alcohol meant you were morally weak. It was sinful, right? And so you had to not drink. He gave no treatment recovery plan except you pray to God. But it gets even better, because what it boiled down to, you pray to God for help with your drinking. And if you couldn't stop drinking, it meant you were unredeemable. Even God don't give a shit about you, right? And then you were sinful and weak. And 200 years later, we still have this thought process, especially in the United States, if not worldwide, right? There's something morally wrong with alcoholics and drug addicts. And again, if most people, going back to what we'll talk about, if most people could have a beer, they don't understand why you can't just have a beer, right? So anyway, but there was no treatment. But around 1840, there was a movement started. It was called the Washingtonian movement, and they called it a moral problem. They did say that. And they said you had to have total abstinence, but they talked about that fellowship of other people with the problem helped. Great. And they would help each other, and there were groups that were all over. At one point, right at the outbreak of the Civil War, there were something like 400,000 people in the Washingtonian movement. And you got to remember, there weren't that many millions of people in the United States in 1858 to 1860 when the war was getting started. So, and it was booming. What killed it was the Civil War, because they brought in, the concept of slavery and all this other. It became political. So the movement sort of went away. It was still around. And at the turn of the century, 1900, you had the psychological movement, with the Freud and the Jung and all this stuff. And a lot of those people talked about you needed a spiritual experience to overcome it. Okay. They didn't give a treatment plan. And then what happened was in 1928-ish or so, there was a movement. Some guys got together and started up the Oxford program again, the Oxford group. They started using idea of the Washingtonian movement, which was about fellowship. And they developed the 6-plan step of recovery, that you had to do a moral inventory. You had to make your amends to the people you've harmed. You had to try to help other people. There was a basic 6-step program. It was one of the first. And it was named the Oxford movement because it was named after a train car on the outskirts of Boston, where these people would go in and out of Boston to go to work. And they developed a group, and people started hearing about it because a lot of people want to quit drinking. This was at the height of the roaring 20s. And so people would do that. And it was a guy that went to the Oxford group that ended up helping the guy that started AA, right? And this keeps going. And Carl Jung tried to help one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he couldn't. But what he said to the people was, excuse me, I got off there. What he said to the people was, you had to have a psychic change. My computer's going crazy, right? And he suggested the Oxford group, that they develop a 6-step program. And basically the 12-step program, which started in 1935, was the Oxford group, the Oxford movement, where they took the 6 steps and they kind of stretched it out a little bit, changed it, made it a little easier to swallow, and it became the 12-step program we know of today. It was the only treatment out there that seemed to work. It's why in the 1960s, when they started to the idea of helping alcoholics and drug addicts, it was the only game in town. It was classical psychotherapy, right? Which was all basically Freudian kind of stuff, and or the 12-step movement, right? And that was it. So that's why it became the default treatment of addictions. And to this day, it still is. But you need to understand how brain chemicals work for us to go to what addiction is. It has to do with, it's called DOS, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. Your brain is always trying to stabilize these chemicals in your brain. When they're stable and they're all in balance, you feel great, right? When they get out of balance, certain bad things happen, right? And in addiction, it feels like there's an itch that you have to scratch. There's a need, and the addiction, whatever it is a way to release, whether it's alcohol or drugs or smoking, food, sex, gambling, right? It gives you relief, right? And what it is, in many cases, it starts as socially acceptable. Having a drink, a dessert, whatever. It could start as socially acceptable. And then it kind of, it's kind of like when you look at smoking, depending on the age, up until the late 80s, people started smoking to fit in, right? And then you become an outcast because you're smoking, right? So it was kind of a switch. Also, addiction feeds into the intermittent reward cycle. Your brain gets more into things if it's intermittently rewarded. If this time I go out and I have a couple drinks and I don't get in trouble, and let's say I meet somebody and I hook up, or this, and today it went well, well, tomorrow it could go to crap, but I'll still remember the one time it went well. It's like the gambler. It's like all they have to do is win occasionally, and that can become addictive. And it has to do with the dopamine and the pleasure cycle in your brain. And addicts and alcoholics, brains are wired differently. What they found is people with addictions, if you take a normal person and you wire up their brain, you're mapping their brain, and they have a beer, certain parts of their brain are gonna light up. It makes you feel good. Your prefrontal cortex kind of dims a little bit, because that's why you get, it's a social lubricant because it removes inhibition. So your frontal cortex kind of quiets down, you relax, you feel good, great. But if you take an alcoholic and you wire them up and you give them alcohol, their brain is like on fire. It's just different, right? And they found this in families where, like one brother that's an alcoholic, and you have another brother that same family, same parents, same genetic code, genetic tree, is not an alcoholic, and their brains respond differently, right? And a lot of it has to do with your endorphins, because when you have a drink, a lot of your addictions, regardless of what it is, like let's say alcohol or opioids, it should tamper down your brain. For certain people, it gives you a mental boost. You feel it should calm you down. It boosts you up, right? I like to think it has the superhero effect. It makes you feel great, right? And it's released when addictions kick in. Now, here's what it boils down to. Your brain's main job is survival. That's why it developed, right? We're not the strongest creatures. We're not the fastest. We're not this. We can think. So your brain developed over millions of years to keep you alive. So survival. So it's keeping you alive. It's searching for threats. It's searching for allies, mating and food. That's the first thing your brain always looks for, right? And depending on your level of life, it depends where you are. If you're under high threat, you're always searching for threat. It's just how your brain's doing things, right? So what happens, this is your brain's job, so it's always doing this. But what people that don't have an addiction or never really dealt with it don't understand, addiction is about survival. It's not like I want to drink. It's not like I want to smoke a joint or take a pain pill or gamble or whatever. It's like I have to do it to stay alive. if I don't do it, I'm going to fucking die, right? Even though intellectually they know the hangover won't kill them or the withdrawals or whatever, but it's I gotta have it, right? And again, from the outside, if you don't have that problem, it's hard to understand it. I will admit that, right? And it also feels like whatever the addiction is the only answer to the problem, right? So whether it's a drink or a drug or alcohol, even though it's causing a problem, that's the answer to the problem, right? And again, so you're under stress. What happens when you're under all this stress? You feel like you're going to die. Your dopamine goes up and you're like, ah, right? And so your body's up like this. It needs to calm down, and your brain will search for what helps, and it's whatever your addiction is, right? And then you have some, and your brain starts to balance, your endorphins kick in, and you're ready to go. So that's kind of what's going on at the subconscious level, right? But one way to think about it is addiction is a soul sickness, right? It's physical, but it also has to do with a spiritual or a soul kind of side of it. You know, the psychological, the psychic side. You know, one of the underlying things you find quite common with people that abuse substances, food, behaviors, is they have an underlying feeling of not being enough, not good enough, not smart enough, not pretty enough, not enough money, right? They never feel normal, right? You hear alcoholics, drug addicts, gamblers, that they talk about, they feels like they have a hole in the soul, right? And the addiction makes you feel normal. That's kind of fascinating to me, right? And the more you do it, the more you see it. Now, really quickly, and then I'll give you some fun stuff, right? There's the levels. This is how addiction seems to develop in my model of the world. Going back, think about habits, think about, the things we talked about, is most people go through these levels. The first level is you don't use. You're abstinent because it's not in your world. You're a little kid. Hopefully you're not drinking or drugging or this or that. You may be in a family where it's there. There's very few exceptions to this rule. They just don't use. They're abstinent. And then you go into the stage of where you experiment with drugs or alcohol. In almost every culture where they have drugs and alcohol, kids are going to experiment. Much as every parent says, not my kid, they're going to smoke a joint, they're going to drink, right? And now when people experiment with it, a certain number will go, I don't like the way this makes me feel. They have a drink, I don't like this. They'll smoke a joint, I don't like this, right? Maybe they'll drink, they'll like that, and they'll smoke a joint, they won't like that, or vice versa, right? They'll experiment. And they may go back to being abstinent. I don't like the way it makes me feel. Most people will go to social use. They can have a beer. You go to a football game, have a beer, high school or whatever, right? But no big deal. They'll socially use. And then some people socially use for a long time and then go back and be abstinent because, it puts weight on me. I don't like the way I can't sleep at night, right? So they'll go from social use back to abstinence, never using, right? But then when I talked about social or substance abuse, it becomes a habit. It could be good, it could be bad. It's like you're self-medicating, right? Like you're going through a divorce. So you're drinking too much. So you're self-medicating. If somebody in your family dies, right? So you're self-medicating. After a while, maybe 6 months or a year or something, you go through the grieving cycle, or you get out of the addiction cycle or abusing that cycle, and you go back to normal. Guess what? If you're abusing substance, most of those people can go back and socially use again. Some may go to be abstinent and never use, but some go, right? And it goes away. It doesn't have to be negative, like all those things, like a country song, divorce, death, all that stuff. It could be you go to college and you go to a fraternity. You join a fraternity or sorority where they're drinking like crazy people for 4 or 5 years, right? And you're abusing it. You get out of college, you get a job, you get a relationship, you go back to being a social user, right? You're in the military, and you're drinking a lot because every time your ship hits port or you get leave, you guys go partying, or girls. Okay, fine. But then you get out of the Marines or the Army or the Navy and you go back and you're fine. So you went through an abuse cycle. Fine. Then, but for a small subsection, like 5% of the people, they develop a genetic, it seems like, predisposition to the addiction. They can't stop. You know, this is the guy that when he was in college, he was a frat boy and he partied like a maniac. Everybody loved him. And then they graduate college and you run into him 15 years later, he's still a frat boy. Can't keep a job, can't keep a relationship because he's still acting like a frat boy, right? You can't stop. It's almost like there's a genetic predisposition to it. The way it's been described, it's like an allergy. If you have an allergy, you know what I'm talking about. My wife has an allergy to shellfish. She can't eat shellfish. It's not about willpower. She eats shellfish, she gets sick, right? So they'd say some people, a genetic people, if they've crossed over into this addiction phase, this substance dependence phase, they can't stop. The only thing they can do is drink or drug or gamble, whatever it is. They can do or not do. They can't do anything in the middle. This group cannot go back and social drink, right? This is why people go into treatment and I'm just going to become a social drinker. Some can. 20 years ago, I'd never said that. Some can, but a small group just can't. And this kind of ties in with the happy rat study. What the happy rat study is, at the height of the, first, the happy rat study goes with, they took some rats, they hooked them on drugs, first heroin, and then they did cocaine, then they did alcohol. And what they did, they put the rat in the cage, they got it hooked, and then usually a male rat, and then they'd throw in a female rat in heat, and the male rat would just ignore it, keep using, they'd throw in good food. The rat basically would drink or drug itself to death. And so that started our zero tolerance drugs, alcohol, bad. You have to, it's the war on drugs. It will kill you, right? Well, that study had a flaw, and this flaw was rats are highly social creatures. And they duplicated the study. They got some rats hooked, but rather than just throw in a female or throw in food, they took the rat out of the unhappy rat cage and put it in a happy rat cage with other rats and stuff to do. And all the rats just quit using, right? Even though the drugs or the alcohol was still there, they just quit using, right? So so there were things going on around it. And this kind of coincided with Vietnam, which at the height of the Vietnam War, there was about 500,000 young men and few women in combat. And it was an unpopular war. It was an unhappy rat cage. And so people were self-medicating. They were drinking, they were drugging. The military brought in liquor to keep people happy. Drugs were plentiful in Vietnam because it's Vietnam. There was the heroin, hashish, all that shit grew great. So people were self-medicating, right? Because it was unpopular. They didn't want to be there. It was dangerous. And so at the height of it, they started gearing up for this major problem. When all these troops would be coming back from Vietnam, they were going to be drug addicts and alcoholics. And what are we going to do with them? A couple million men we're sending to combat. What are we going to do with them? And by the way, they're warriors. They've seen combat. They're good with weapons. It's not a good recipe. So they geared up for this problem. And guess what happened? Almost 90% of them came back after a period of readjustment. They were fine. They didn't keep using drugs. They didn't keep drinking too much. They went back to being normal. And then when they really broke it down, the guys that went back to a more happy situation, they went back to college, or they got the job at the factory. That's when we had factory jobs. They got married, they settled down, they went back to normal. A small subset, like 3 to 10%, depending how you look at it, they couldn't stop drinking. And it has nothing to do with post-traumatic stress, by the way. Right? It has to do with getting into a happy situation, going out of the unhappy rat cage. Now, the people that seem to have more trouble, guess what? They were going back into unhappy situations, right? They were going back into the inner city where there were no jobs. They were going back to the bad situation, a dysfunctional family that wasn't going to get any better, right? And even if it was an okay situation, they didn't like the situation, so there was that. So what happens, these two things changed how I thought about addictions. It's why you see some people go into treatment or go to therapy or go to hypnosis or go to 12-step program for a while, pull out of the addiction, the abuse cycle, and then go back to normal. Now, for most people trained in clinical classical addiction study, that was verboten. It was physically impossible. You could never do this, right? And then I was seeing all this evidence to the contrary. People would just come in, they'd get better from the 12-step viewpoint, and they would disappear. You run into them, they're fine. They may or may not be drinking, but they're fine, right? And so that's what begins, that those two studies made me relook at addictions. And then all the stuff was coming out about the brain mapping and how it's a brain-based disease and how there's a genetic predisposition to it with epigenetics. You know, you could be genetically prone to addiction. It may never manifest because you may never drink enough to activate it. You could be genetically predisposed to diabetes, but if you don't eat a bad diet, you may not get it, right? So and one of the things underneath it, maybe addiction is a disease of connection. Can you connect with other people, right? And again, if you can't connect, if you come from it's why, again, there's all the studies, there's a genetic component, and then you add in a family of an alcoholic where you don't learn to connect with people, right? It's your genetics, your epigenetic structure then will fire up you being an addict or an alcoholic, right? And then let's add, which is, what's the, you know, when you add in the pleasure happiness syndrome, right? Which is, you know, the difference between just being happy or what is pleasurable. We've confused these things. Are you happy? You know, people don't think they can be happy unless they're doing something absolutely pleasurable, right? So this is the conflict. And it really goes down to a thing I'm beginning to read a lot about, again, about contentment is what we've lost, right? Because when you feel contentment, you don't want anything. You don't want more food. You don't want more alcohol. You don't want more money. You're just content. I'm fine right now, right? Which is a wonderful state of being, except it's not good for a capitalist-driven society where we need you wanting more, 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 spend, spend, spend. So we are not taught to just be content. That contentment is happiness. Again, now we've flipped over that happiness is pleasure, and you can always want more pleasure. And pleasure is fleeting. You know, you eat the meal, you have the sex, you have the drink, whatever it is, it goes away. I want more. I want more, right? And again, contentment's wanting more. And for most of history, if you were content, people thought that as happiness. You know, there's food in there enough to last for a few days. There's, you know, the food, I have shelter. Yeah, right? That was happiness. And again, you lose sight of this, right? And a lot of this is the way we're trained. We're constantly being trained by the media, right? By society. And it's easy to lose sight. And I always talk about the Princeton study. I've been talking about a lot again. But the Princeton study, of course, is they took some seminary students that were going to Princeton University, and they said, you know, your job, your assignment is you're going to preach on the Good Samaritan. So they got to review the Good Samaritan, you know, helping people in need, yada, yada, yada. Fine. So they had their little speech in their head, and then they were given the assignment of where they were going to go preach or give their talk. But it was set up like, oh, you've only got like 5 minutes to get there, and it's an 8-minute fast walk, so they're hurrying to get there. Well, the real study was all these people are on their way to preach on the Good Samaritan. They'd taken the people from the theater group, theater classes, and hired them to be people that needed help, wounded, hurt, laying there. None of the preachers stopped to help the people. Even things like, excuse me, you're a student here. Yeah, well, I need to find this building. I don't have time right now. I got to go, right? I'm lost. I don't have time. Including a couple people literally stepped over people laying on the sidewalk so they could get in the building so they could go preach on why you want to be a good Samaritan, right? And that's what begins to happen. We lose sight of what's really important, you know? And one of the things we could begin to think about with this lockdown is it's caused us to look at things differently. What's really bringing me pleasure or happiness or contentment, you know? Can you adapt, right? And again, but we're a consumer society. We have the fear of missing out. We want more, 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 constant excitement, easily bored. And that feeds into if you're predisposed to addiction, it's going to feed into it, right? So how do people recover? Well, first of all, you have to want it more than anything. You know, when it's time to fight, you got to fight like you're the third monkey on the ramp to Noah's Ark, and brother, it's starting to rain. You gotta want it more than anything. All of us that do hypnosis and NLP has had the experience of a client coming to you say, you know, hey, I really want this more than anything. I want to stop smoking or whatever it is, lose weight, whatever it is, work with this addiction. And you're like, great. And you're working with them. You say, okay, now before you come back next week, I need you to do this, listen to this recording and do these 2 simple things. They come back the next week. How you doing? It's not working. What do you mean? I smoked some cigarettes or I ate cake, whatever. Oh, really? Did you listen to the recording? Nope. Did you do this other stuff? Nope. Did you do this? Nope. Well, last week you said this was the most important thing in the world to you. You know, you got to want it, right? This is the part that we can use our hypnosis and NLP to fire up different desire patterns in people to help them to really want to quit. You know, to find a true driver, right? A true driver, right? Because society is always trying to find this in people, so to help people, but everybody's going to be motivated differently. People talk about hitting their bottom in an addiction. It doesn't necessarily mean Skid Row living under a bridge. It might be, I missed my kid's soccer game. That's their bottom. That's it. They're done, right? Right? And so you could find whatever it is and use that, right? But the secrets that we have to think about as people wanting to help addicts is addicts are set up to fail in our culture. There's money in pain. You know, they're selling them more beer, more wine, more dope, more pain pills, right? So they're set up to fail, right? Just last year, they were busting treatment centers here in Florida because they were actually setting people up to relapse so they could put them back in treatment, especially people like 24-year-olds because they're still on their parents' insurance. And you go through treatment, you'd be living in a sober house. They don't call them rehabs anymore, and they would set it up so they could relapse, so they could go back into treatment while they were still on their parents' insurance, right? It was a big deal down here. We're set up to fail, right? And what most people know about addiction is wrong. It's based in your neurology. You have to change your neurology. You have to change your neural pathways. And that's what we can do with hypnosis and addiction. And you have to change from the inside out to develop a new relationship with alcohol and drugs, right? And addiction feeds many levels, you know, and it's why just stopping is never enough, whether it's alcohol, drugs, sex, booze, gambling, pornography, eating. If you just change, that's not enough. There has to be a deep psychic change, if you will. You want to call it spiritual awakening, you want to call it anything else, things like that. That's one of the things the 12-step program does, is it gives you a step-by-step method of how to get there, right? And you know, I like the 12-step. I know it's not for everybody, but it gives you a model for people to follow, right? And if you're not familiar with it, I think everybody should at least look at how it works, because it seems to work a lot, right? Next time, we're going to talk about human needs. I'm going to do one more of these where I'll give more exact techniques on helping with addicts. I'm going to give you one today that you can use, right? And what I've seen work the best, you know. But next time, we're going to talk about what drives addiction, whether it's needs, you know, and how you have to use some kind of model to help you overcome it, right? And how all of this gets together. The little one technique I'm going to share with today, it's fast. It's very fast. And after being around this field for almost 40 years, right? Um, and I've always, what made me start looking at addictions differently, again, it was about 20 years ago, was like I said, those studies were coming out. It made me look at everything differently. I had to realize maybe what I was taught wasn't correct. And that's kind of painful. When you've been living your life a certain way and you look at it and go, maybe I was wrong. Can you admit you were wrong? Or maybe you didn't have the right information. I like the term, I mislearned some things, but it was based on the information at hand. In fact, people still do it. I just saw somebody post a thing about, most of your communication, only 7% of your communication is verbal, 55% is like body language, whatever that number is, right? Because that's based on some study. Well, you know what? That's bullshit, because the guy that did that sort of study goes, it was taken totally out of context, right? He was one says, no, it depends what you're doing, but sometimes up to 75% of your communication is the words that you use. If you align it, if you become coherent with your body language and everything else, it's much more powerful. But again, people mislearned it, and so they keep regurgitating things that just aren't true. And then you become defensive of it. And I was that way about there was only one way to attack addiction. There was this, and this. But then I started seeing all this evidence to the contrary. And I went, God damn, I may have been misinformed. Through no negative, it's just the way that it was, right? And so it made me start looking at things. And the first thing I started to looking around all the people I knew in recovery or being around treatments and all this, is why do some people make it and other people not? Whether it's like the 12-step program, somebody comes in the 12-step program and they're doing everything somebody tells them to do. They're going to meetings, they've got a sponsor, they're doing the steps, they're doing everything right, they can't get it. Then other people come in, they do some of that crap and they sober up, right? What's the difference? Why do some people make it, other not? Same with therapy. Some people go to therapy and it seems to work for them, other people not. Same with hypnosis, everything. It's like, So one of the things I found was part of that psychic shift, but it was different than, getting a religious experience. It was shifting your personal identity at a deep level. And it was simple. It wasn't as complicated as people make it out to be. And it was the idea that when it comes to the addiction, they developed the idea, the belief that is not who I am anymore. And would just be natural. Hey, would you like a drink? No, why not? Used to drink a lot. It's not who I am anymore. All right. I just had this personal experience. We talked to somebody I went to high school with because they were trying to set up some like multi-year reunion. And I'm like, sure, I donated money. I said, maybe I'll get there. And they said, oh yeah, and somebody actually wrote me and said, is it true you really quit drinking? Because it was a big part of my high school experience. It's one of the reasons I joined the Army was I had to. Anyway, I said, yeah. And he said, why, you were such a partier. I said, well, it's not who I am anymore. And I went, damn, I do that, just like all the people I studied, right? And this is true for whatever it is. When you make a deep fundamental change, it's just not who you are anymore. The behavior does not fit in any context, right? So whatever the addiction is, there's nothing it'll make better. There's no pain it'll take away. And there's no behavior I do that I need that to do or that people do, right? And so, and they could do it with the 12-step program. They could do it with a religious program. I see people start to work out. They get into work, whatever it is. They make a deep fundamental change of that's not who they are anymore, right? And then the change starts to happen. It's like the flip. And what it is, the technique is called the flip, is where you think about things that are no longer true for you, right? So it might be I used to live in Indiana, in Chicago. Now I live in Florida. So in my head, I had that part of my brain where I don't live there anymore. Yeah, but I used to live right by Wrigley Field, if I want to use that way. Yep, I can picture that. It's true. And there's no judgment. It's just, I don't live there anymore. It's not true for me. So it's back here. Well, so that's one part of my brain. Now, what's true for me? I live where I live now, Venice, Florida. It's right here. It's right there. So these are two different things. So when I begin to make changes, they eventually, if they're going to become permanent, they'll go to that part of my brain that's not true for me anymore. Right? And this can be very powerful. You could flip things in there quicker than normal. Right? So if you, and all you have to do for this to work is you find something in a client and a target that you're talking to. Is there something you used to do that you now no longer do? And they go, yeah, I used to, whatever it is. I just did this with someone and we were talking and I said, what's something you used to do and now you don't? They said, I used to eat a lot of really sweet candy, sweet, sugary candy. I go, so you don't anymore? No. Was it difficult? And he had to do one of these. If you're into NLP, he's looking around going, not really. Maybe it was a little at first, but I just don't eat it anymore. It's not who, and he didn't say that's not who I am, but he's like, no, I don't do that anymore. I said, what if you're somewhere and what kind of candy was it? And he named something, right? And he goes, oh yeah, like at, Halloween when you put out that candy corn that's nothing but pure sugar. He goes, oh my God, I would eat that crap like it was no tomorrow when I was a kid and a teenager. And then he just kind of, whether you want to say grew out of it, whatever it was, he goes, I go, what happens now if I had a bag of candy corn and I put it out there? He goes, oh shit, I'd never have that, So that was in a different part of his brain. So then the behavior that we're working on, I knew that I could place the negative back there. I said, well, what's true for you now? Where do you live? What do you do? Your relationship. So he told me all that and it was all in one spot in his head. So I said, okay, so we took the behavior, what he was trying to do. I said, now take that behavior of you skipping workouts, being lazy, just put it back there with the candy corn. You don't do it anymore. At one time you would look for reasons to skip workouts. Now what I want you to do is we developed a concept of working out regularly and put it into that place of where you work out of what's true for you. So the idea of not doing it is back there, which it's just no longer true for you. And then put the idea that you do it, that's who I am. And then I did give him the command, if you will, to do the mantra of skipping workouts is not who I am. The kind of guy who skips workout is not who I am. I find a way to work out. That's who I am. I find a way to work out. That's who I am. And it was kind of funny to me because in this lockdown thing where all the gyms closed, that's what I noticed. There was a whole bunch of people that if they had that mindset, this is who I am, I work out, I'll do Taibo, I'll do yoga, I'll go for runs, I'll do things I don't normally do because I can't go to the gym. But if it's part of who you are, you will find a way to do it. And it's the same for your addiction recovery. You will find a way to stay sober. I look for reasons to stay sober. If I'm looking for a reason to drink, there's plenty of reasons, I mean, in my case, I only drank in days that ended in Y. So tough crowd, lighten up. Anyway, so next time, I'll probably be either next Saturday or Sunday, I'll do one where I'll do 3 specific other techniques, and I'll write and I'll send out, if you want this technique, email me the flip. It's pretty easy. It's just the part of your brain that's no longer true for you. Things in your life that are no longer true for you. You could start with where you used to live, things like old relationships, so that wherever it is in their head, it is, right? Think about things that's true for them. Then if you can help them find something in their life that they change naturally that they can think of, if let's say you're working with somebody who drank, now take their drinking, put it in that part of their brain that's no longer true for them, like whatever it was, right? And then to develop the idea of this is who I am now. I'm the kind of person that just doesn't drink no matter what, or use or get high or whatever it is. And once that locks in, it shifts your deep core identity. All right, let me stop the share. Boom. All right, everybody. Next week, it'll either be Saturday or Sunday. I'll do 3 specific fast techniques, and we'll have fun with it. I don't want to take too much of your time. I'm respectful of that, but it's always a pleasure to teach this because we're already beginning to see it. There's some things going on with the, how many people are reaching out. And aside, a whole bunch of the alcohol and drug treatment centers, it seems that they're shutting down, right? They might not be able to come out of this pandemic, or as I call it, plandemic. They won't be able to survive it. They've lost staff, especially in some of the places where, like, there's a lot of treatment centers, Las Vegas, Arizona, Southern California, and Florida. They expect to lose 10 to 15% of the treatment facilities, or 10 to 15% of the beds. And there's already a lot of beds. And one of the things about being a hypnotist that I stress, why I want to teach you about at least some techniques, make you comfortable with it. That was today. This is kind of how addictions work. Is there's a lot of people that are going to reach out for help that don't want to go to treatment. They don't want to go to treatment for a lot of specific reasons, which makes sense. Number one, they don't want it on their insurance forms, right? And it could be very detrimental to certain professions. If you're a pilot and you go into treatment, you're not a pilot for a while. It takes several years to get your flight status back, right? So it's one of those, get help, but we're going to fire you, right? If you're a medical doctor and you go in for treatment, you're automatic, even if you'd gotten no trouble, you didn't get in trouble, you're automatically on the impaired physicians list. I used to do work with them, right? And so I used to get calls from doctors that wanted help before they wouldn't go to treatment because they didn't want to become an impaired physician, because guess what goes through the freaking roof is their liability insurance, right? Police officers, where I'm at, a lot of teachers don't want to go through traditional treatment because it gets on their insurance. It's just what it is. So they can go see a hypnotist, and we can help. So we're seeing a lot of that, and also too, a lot of social workers and psychologists, they either seem to specialize in addiction, or they usually kind of want to refer it out. At least that's been my experience, right? Because there's probably a lot of reasons for it, but it's just like, it's what it is. So I think the calls they may come up, right? And again, because of the maladaptive stuff that went on for the last 12 weeks or so, and and then people will be questioning, am I an addict? Am I an alcoholic? Or was I just, and maybe they just need a jump start back to normal living. So that's one reason I wanted to put it out there. They may not be able to get treatment. And also it may be detrimental for them to go into treatment, so because you'll get labeled. And my evidence for that is I was sober like 16 years and I went to get or life insurance, and it ruined a relationship, by the way. But the person, I knew them, and when I was filling out the form for a life insurance policy, he came back and says, I can't give you this. There's going to be like a 40% extra on your premium. I said, why is that? And he said, because you're an alcoholic. I said, excuse my language, how the fuck do you know that? He goes, well, I know you. You're part of he was sort of a relative, right? And I go, I didn't put it on the form. He goes, yeah, but I know it, so I have to do this, right? And it kind of brought everything up, because I'm like, you son of a bitch, one of your sons just got a DUI. But anyway, let's not go down that path. But it's like, and I've known other people, if you try to this day, if you say you've ever had alcohol or drug treatment, they may reject you for life insurance, certain other things. I know when I got my weapons permit here in Florida, I went round and round of, do I check the box that I've had alcohol and drug treatment? Right? Because I don't know what if I checked, I don't know what it does, but I'm like, why are they asking that question? Right? So there could be all kinds of reasons. Anyway, that's enough out of that. So any questions to wrap up? You can unmute yourself. Or any comments?
Excellent information. Thank you. And it's applicable across all walks of life, really.
Cool. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I just want to thank you for being so generous with your time and your.
Yes. Yeah. Me too.
Thank you. Oh, I got to say, the captain's on the bridge. Inside joke. The captain's on the bridge.
Yes, Will. And in fact, you're talking about people who don't want to acknowledge that they've had treatment or seeking treatment for drug or alcohol, are also people that work in the government and have clearances.
Oh, I always forget. Yeah. It's a career killer.
It's a little close to home, so I just naturally came to mind.
Yeah. All right. So I'd like to thank everybody. Any other comments or questions? Shoot me questions if you have questions. I'll send it out next week. I'll do another one either on Saturday or Sunday, and it'll be like just a couple quick techniques. We'll just do his techniques so people can practice.
Thank you, Dr. Will. I just got this today.
Oh,
nice.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Can you show that again?
Pardon?
Can she show that book again?
Yeah, there's the book.
I think it will
yes.
show in a reflection,
the alcohol and
like
addiction
some mirror
situation.
reflection, but that's written by Dr. Will. So I'd ordered it. I just received it today. So thank you very much.
Cool. All right. Well, the next time I see you, have the book. I'll sign it. Yeah. I'm redoing that book. I'm updating it, but. Yeah.
Dr. Will, I just have a question. Are you going to be doing a master's NLP at all? Do you have any plans for that?
I'm not sure when, but yes, I'll do one. Probably in the fall.
Okay, because I signed up for the NLP practitioner one. I did one already with Matthew, but I wanted to do I wanted to do it again with you.
Okay.
Because I'm an addiction specialist, and I really resonate. I resonate, with your style and where you're coming from. I've been doing it for 35 years, so I'd like to do the NLP again with you. But I am ready also for the masters.
Okay.
So if you let me know,
Yes.
just shoot out your email for your agenda.
Okay. Cool. So yeah,
Thank
since
you.
you're an addiction counselor, yeah, the colorful language gets cool around addiction sometimes. So.
Yeah, it was kind of different, doing the NLP with somebody who's not of our kind of persuasion. Like we see things a little bit differently.
Yeah. 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 But usually, you know what though? People that come from alcohol and drugs, I think they get a boost when they get into hypnosis and NLP because they look at things differently.
Yeah.
It's like the old, how do you know if your client's is lying to you? Because first of all, they're talking. Or it's, what's that line from the TV show House? It's not that they're consciously lying. They don't even know they're lying.
Oh, and it's so fun to watch though, isn't it? But thank you so much for this. This was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
See y'all later. I'll see you as we trudge the road to happy destiny.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.